Good morning, YouTube. WarblesOnALot here with a video for Earl, Portland. Response vid, Earl, to your questions to me in a video that I saw a couple of hours ago, where you were asking why I had a bit of a temper tantrum at Fred conference report. And thanks for explaining how you thought the encounter went. And unless I got this one wrong, you thought I made a movie that was a knife review, and then Fred made his movie Camp and Knives, and therefore you thought I was upset at Fred for the innuendo that people who make knife review videos are actually indulging in a fairly camp form of fashion-oriented display obsessional behaviour. And then, because I was supposed to be upset about Fred calling me camp for making a knife review, therefore you thought I had a temper tantrum at him. Yeah, that would be right, but for the fact that you got the initial chronology arse about horse before the cartwards. The way it actually happened, just change hands there, is that Fred made a video Camp and Knives. I watched his video Camp and Knives. He started his video by opening a bottle of beer, and I thought it'd be fun to have a beer with him, so I opened a bottle of beer as well. And as I got drunker watching his video, it sort of grated on me that he was wrong about something, right? Now, there was no doubt in my mind that Fred intended to refer to the homophobic connotations of the word camp and the homosexual connotations of the word camp. Right, I was pretty sure that somebody who's got a PhD, so poor hungry doctor, in performance art, pretty sure that when he uses the word camp in a movie title to display fashion-oriented behaviour among the he-men, and when, you know, definitely so when he's got the word woofter, W-O-O-F-T-A-H, got that word in the clip description, I'm sure I'm, you know, harmonising with the meaning that he's intending to convey in his communication. That's, you know, that's my grip on that one. So I was attempting to demonstrate to Fred that he was wrong in thinking that anybody who cares about the finer points of their knife design is overly obsessed with meaningless details and fripperies and frills, and therefore they must be sort of latent homosexuals at some chunk or part or portion of their mind, and you know that's why they're into the knives, and they worry about, you know, how long the blade is and how wide the blade is and how thick the blade is and how long it takes to sharpen and how all of these features, as well as the decorative things like how many lumps and bumps there are on the handle and whether it's got a crossguard or not. Yeah, Fred seemed to have the idea that because carrying a pen knife probably isn't actually very relevant to your life if you're a PhD lecturing in performance art at a university. Yeah, in Australia, you're not allowed to carry a knife onto a school. I don't know whether that carries through to universities, but yeah, the way teenagers and angry people have been going off behaviourally with knives ever since they banned guns. I wouldn't be surprised if you know there's some regulation that prevents Fred from actually even having a penknife in his pocket, because you know nobody needs a penknife to sharpen their goose quill to, you know, grade the assignments anymore. So therefore you're not allowed to have one because you don't need one. Otherwise it's just a fashion item. Yeah, anyway, that was what I was making my movie about. It was not about the innuendo. If Fred wanted to say that knife reviews were made by people who were secretly camp, he could do that. I thought he was wrong about it. In the comment thread under my 10,000 Years of Knife Reviews movie, which I made for Fred at Conference Report, he accused me of, misunderstanding him entirely. He said that he didn't refer to homosexuality at all in his movie Camp and Knives. Well, I'm sorry, you mean somebody who works at a university doesn't understand that camp is a reference in the modern vernacular to homosexuality, overt homosexuality, whether it's latent homosexuality that leaks out or whether it's homosexuality that's flaunted. But camp has an association with homosexuality because Boy Scouts go camping and Scoutmasters are notorious for being homosexuals, sometimes pedophiles. Hence the British expression, so-and-so is as camp as a row of tent pegs. Right? I just wanted to suggest to him that understanding the design minutiae of a knife isn't actually a valid indication of somebody's campiness. But because I'm aware of the fact that the performance art community has its own jargon and its own understanding of the meanings of words, which is sometimes at variance from the vernacular in use in the community, that it probably would be wise to identify Fred's level of education and his social milieu in my video, and therefore I mentioned the fact that he's a lecturer, and I mentioned the name of the university. And I didn't think that I was going out of line by mentioning his actual name, which I'm not going to mention here because he has since asked me not to, and he's explained his position on it, and I don't agree that he's holding a valid viewpoint, but he's fully entitled to hold a non-valid viewpoint in my estimation. So I'm not going to mention what his last name is. But in view of the fact that it's like less than a week since he's made a movie mentioning his position, his his profession, the name of his place of employment and his employer and the work that they're involved in, I didn't think I was at all out of line with saying that, Fred lectures in performance art at da-di-da-di-da University, because he's been, e-begging, asking people to pretty please send a donation so that it can fund his university bringing, Richard the Cock Dicklin to come down and do a comedy skit about eating fetuses for Jesus. He's bandying his university's name around, so that shouldn't have been any problem at all. And then he had a movie a couple of months ago called I Is a Swarm, I Is, and in that one he explained how it is that he manages to do such well-researched replies to people, keep up with all the comments, post the high-grade videos that he posts, and still, feed his dog, comb his hair and hold down a job as well, It's because he's not one person. He says he's a clone. He says he's got subsidiary brains that are out there doing his research for him, answering the comments for him, as long as they act in a delegated fashion, so they say and do and look at things as they think Fred would. They feed him with information and data, and he's just the public talking head of the cloned Fred, a construct. Okay, well, I thought that was pretty clever. But in the course of that movie, he explained what his last name was. So I didn't think I was speaking out of line at all, because I've got two pigeonholes in my mind. There are those people who don't want anybody to know what their name is. Some of them don't let you know their first name. Some of them don't let you know their last name. Some of them, as they gradually become more friendly, they let you know their first name on a PM, and then they'll let you know their last name on a PM, but it's kind of understood that they don't want their name out there. And Fred used to be in that category right up until he said what his last name was in one of his videos. And I really couldn't understand why he was so huffy in the comment thread under my movie, 10,000 Years of Knife Reviews. When I got a PM from him asking me to take his name out of the title. I went, like, what there? And I went and had a look at the title. And that's when I discovered the next morning that I'd actually stuck the first 3 letters of his last name into the title. Didn't do the whole thing because I didn't know how to spell it correctly. And I have no idea why I thought that was a good idea. But I pulled that out for him and I explained to him in a PM what my understanding of the situation was, and I couldn't understand why he was doing such a big backflip on his previously publicly announced position that he didn't care if we used his name. Then I had a look at my subscriptions activity and I found that there's a movie by Fred not mentioning me by name but complaining about the end of anonymity and how terrible it was, and he was also complaining that one of my subscribers had tackled him on the thread of my movie, because it's well known I can't leave comments or post them, and Fred had got snarky with the subscriber of mine on the comment thread, and Fred announced that he'd then gone and googled the bloke and found out his past history and what his political affiliations are and what his job is and what his medical history is and all the rest of it, and Fred sort of got a bit of a savage glint in his eye when he said that, in a holier-than-thou thing as to how terrible and tragic it would be if somebody was to just go and Google that and then use it, make it public domain. And it was just like, hang on. We had a dispute about whether knife reviews were camp. I've never made a lot of knife reviews. I've never watched a lot of knife reviews. The only 2 people I've watched knife reviews that I can recall are Conference Report, that's Fred, and Earl Portland, that's you, right? So, okay, I've shown some of my knives previously to talk about other aspects of them. In Atheist, the God of the Atheist movie, I talk about the cookery, and in YouTube sculpture video I've shown the honey locust handle on the Bowie, but I generally, I'm not much into knife reviews. And because I corrected Fred on his idea that all of the allegedly fashion-obsessed aspects of knife design are actually an indication of latent homosexuality, instead of just accepting my point or saying that he wanted to agree to differ on it, he ran off down an entirely different point of contention, one in which he's the only person who's allowed to make any rules because it's whether I'm allowed to mention his name. And not only did he shift the dispute, the discussion, the debate onto a completely different playing field with completely different rules, once he got there, he then made an implied threat to drop the documents on the person who dared to contradict him on my thread. And so, therefore, thus and because I had a bit of a temper tantrum to camera in my video, Fred likes it both ways. Yes, I loaded it up with exactly the same innuendo regarding latent homosexuality or bisexuality as Fred had loaded into his one on Camp on Knives, but the video wasn't about the innuendo. I mean, that was just a little cherry on the top to make it spin better. The video was about the irritation levels engendered by doing a spectacular backflip on a previously advertised public position and not acknowledging the previous position, not saying anything in the meantime, just, oh, boo-hoo, sob, sob, the end of anonymity is nigh because WarblesOnALot dared to mention Fred's last name after Fred said it was okay. And, I wonder how it happened and why it happened, and all I can come up with is Fred is a PhD in performance art. He teaches people how to act, how to pretend. So he must be bloody good at pretending himself. So therefore what we're looking at is a pretense of an image of a construct. He's told us he's a clone. And sometimes I think he must be trolling. I mean, I know he must have been trolling in his movie about walls and arches, and he couldn't understand how when the brickwork, the lining of the arch, which he fantasised apparently was holding the arch up, when the mortar fell out of the bricks and the bricks dropped out and there was nothing, quote, holding up the arch, but the stones were still there. And he asked for input on that. PhD. Being paid to live in the gilded cage at the top of the ivory towers in the rarefied atmosphere of the halls of academe, and he doesn't know what holds the stones up on an arch. couldn't he have connected it somehow to the Masonic Lodge? The sort of quasi-paramilitary pseudo-religious organisation that's totally devoted since the Middle Ages to the preservation of the mathematics and the formula of calculating the curvature of an arch, the mass of the side buttress walls, and the angles of the dangles on all the faces of the pieces of stone in order to have it stay standing. And even then it was really old, because the Code of Hammurabi, the first civic code in ancient Babylon, it stipulated that when the scaffolding was being taken down from any arch on any building being made in Babylon, the architect, A-R-C-H-I-T-E-C-H-T, the architect had to stand there underneath the stones, and if they fell on his head, it was a Darwinian way of making sure they only had good architects. How can Fred not know that? So therefore that movie, he must have been trolling, yeah? He was just acting like a fuckwit and doing it very believably, and a whole bunch of people took him at his word. Okay, so he must, maybe, he was trolling in that whole I is a swarm, I is thing. When he said it's okay to use his name, he must have been trolling, because later on when I took him at his word, he had a hissy fit. And I had a hissy fit back at him, not about the camp shit, you know. Not hissy about that at all. I think he was wrong, but I'm hissy about the backflip. Does that make better sense, Earl? I hope so. Anyway, I hope so, Earl. It's because, like, you might understand this being a member of the cowboy culture, but here in post-neo-colonial Australia, where we've just got knights and dames reintroduced again at the top of the Australian honours list, there's an old-fashioned attitude that a gentleman's word is their bond, okay? And every now and then I've run into problems with that. Once it was actually to do with an issue of sexuality, and I think it's a good enough story, I'll tell it to you. I was a student nurse, and like the first time I went into a pub in Tamworth with a shoulder bag to get a drink, and one of the rednecks there, country and western capital of Australia, asked me what I did. I said I was a student nurse. He looked at me and started to burr up, and he said, "Oh, what, you're a poofter, are you?" And I said, "Hang on, mate. 96 women, 3 men, 1 spare room. They pay me to live in the nurses' home." And I quoted canteen prices for meals up there too at the hospital cafeteria. And he said, "Oh, shit, can I get a job there?" Okay, so different hospital later on, big city, bigger hospital. And the director of nursing was a man who had been in one of the first intakes of student nurses. And as it happened, he and I went to the same boarding school, so there was a bit of an old school tie connection there. It's probably why I got the job. Certainly how I held the job. I was living in the nurse's home, and there was a thing called a home sister, and that was the old registered nurse who ran all the nurses' homes. There was a couple of women's nurses' homes, and there was an extended series of male nurses' homes. And there was a policy that male student nurses were not permitted to have females in their room. Technically, it excluded one's mother or sister or auntie or grandmother, but it was particularly vociferously applied to the idea of a female student nurse visiting the male nurses' quarters and studying in his room, right? So this used to annoy me, and one of the features that annoyed us was the fact that half the nursing staff was male, half the nursing staff was homosexual at that particular hospital at that particular time, and it meant that all the gays and all the lesbians, they were allowed to have their boyfriend or girlfriend couple in their rooms to study. It was only the heterosexuals who were being discriminated against. So we had a student council meeting about it, and a resolution was passed, and the director of nursing was at that meeting. And we put our case to him, and the director of nursing, who was an overt homosexual with male partner, he said he agreed with us, and he thought the policy was ridiculous, and he would overturn it immediately. Good, we thought. Next day, when there were female student nurses in the TV room in H block, which was a male nurse's quarters, down comes the home sister, and she huffs and puffs. And we told her, and she went back to check on it. Come the Monday, in the nursing training school, we get sat down in the classroom by the head of the school, and we all get given a written letter signed by the Director of Nursing forbidding the practice of students of opposite sex being in each other's rooms or quarters. And I stood up on my hind legs and I said, well, hang on, yesterday he said this, or Friday he said this to us at the meeting. And the head of the School of Nursing looked at me and said, Chris, get real. In this modern society, it doesn't matter what he says, it matters what's on paper, what he's written. And I said, what about the idea that a gentleman's word is his bond? And the silence hung in the air till you could cut it with a knife because there was nothing to refute it. And eventually I was harangued and battered and abused for how dare I cast such aspersions on the character of the Director of Nursing. But the question was never answered. Right? But if a gentleman's word is his bond, Fred had no right to get pissy at me for using his name because he gave me that permission. That's what it was about. Not about the campiness. You know, he was being tongue-in-cheek. I was, being just as tongue-in-cheek, showing him a 10,000-year-old boomerang carving stone and pointing out the features and asking why that was camp. Hope that helps, Earl. WarblesOnALot to YouTube. Ciao.